So good morning, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on maximising team performance. I'm Hedda Bird, and you will be able to interact with me directly after the end of this session, which will last about 20 minutes. Or in the meantime, you can put any questions or thoughts that you want in chat. Becky, I'm going to encourage you, you might want, hello, lovely to see you. You might want to turn your camera off while I'm recording, and then we can put the cameras back on once we finish the recording, and we can then talk to each other more directly. So today's subject, team performance. It's an interesting one, isn't it? So what do we know about it? Well, the first thing to obviously share with you is a little something about us for those of you who don't know us. We specialise in performance management. You might have guessed that from the tin. And we are working with lots of different clients. Helen, could you mute everybody just because I'm getting a bit of background noise here? So that would be good to get mute all. Thank you. So as you can see from this list of clients, and I'll just go back. We work with a lot of organisations who are technical, professional, academic, in many cases where people have been promoted on the basis of their technical, professional or academic skill and not on the basis of their people management skills. And so we work with a lot of organisations where the need to put people management into a well-educated, intelligent workforce is paramount. You can see here, public sector, private sector, large, small, global and local, so a wide range. So that's the only advertising you're really going to hear from me. We've got a great team of people. Many of you, I think, actually know quite a few of our teams. So what am I doing today? We're going to start off by thinking about what we actually mean by performance and productivity. And I'm sure you don't have to have been listening to the news very hard to have heard that the need to improve productivity is the fundamental way in which we improve overall the wealth of the country. So we need to understand what that means and how it connects to performance. Then we're going to think about what actually drives productivity and performance in your organisation. And then we're going to look at a conversation guide around applying those principles in practice. So let's start here. What do we mean when we say we want to maximise performance? Maximising performance means making the best use of our team's energy, time and talent to deliver the maximum possible results. That's what we mean. It means making the best use of what we have. Productivity is slightly different. Productivity is a very specific measure of the cost per unit of output. And to improve productivity, we must either reduce the cost of each unit of output or increase the value of each unit. So productivity is a very precise measure, but in fact, in lots of organizations, it's a very hard thing to measure. So many of you will work in HR. How on earth do we know that we've improved the productivity of our HR team? Because we probably don't even know what the cost of a unit of output is. And anyway, what is a unit of output from HR? So we might break it down into things like what's the cost of recruitment or what's the cost of dealing with a grievance. But even with those things, it's often not clear what the real costs are associated with those things. But ironically, it can often be easier to understand how our team is performing. And though it's open to interpretation, we could probably get a better view of, are we making the best use of our team's energy, time and talent? So in your organizations, especially those of you who are working at senior level, there might be a lot of focus on we need to improve productivity, we need to improve productivity. But I would encourage those of you who engage with senior managers across your organization to think hard with them about what is it they're actually seeking to improve, because in many of them, they will be operating without a cost per unit of output, especially in a place like a local authority, in a place like a university. You know, the cost per unit of teaching wouldn't be a very good measure because it would tell us nothing about the impact of our teaching, the quality of our teaching, or even, you know, how we're researching or what we're bringing to that teaching. So be very careful when people talk about productivity, that they know what they're talking about and that you then think, actually, should we really be talking about performance here? So with that in mind, let us move on to think about performance is an outcome, right? The performance of what we do is an outcome. So what are the inputs that we have that we can influence? Well, the first input is what's often called productivity, but we often really mean efficiency. And in kind of the easy language is often called doing things faster, being more efficient, let it all get done faster. We have quality. We can improve the quality of what we do, which often in the vernacular is then called better. We can cut the costs of what we do, which is often then called cheaper. We can simply increase the volume or scope of what we do, which is simply called more. Or we can do something more innovative, which tends to be something that's more like new or change. So these are really the dimensions of performance. So when you are thinking about how is my team performing, where can I maximize performance, you might be thinking about any of these things from an input point of view. But remember, in order to think from an input point of view, you need to understand your outputs and your impacts. So you've really got two questions. First is, what scope do you have for action? So, you know, you can't possibly change your budgets, right? So you can't increase your money to invest, perhaps. Maybe you're stuck with the team you've got. Maybe you've got a fixed geographical location. There'll be all sorts of things that you can't change, but you should perhaps spend some real time thinking, where could you make a difference? What are all the areas where you can think that you have space to change? And then around that, you then need to think about your people. So what strengths, and by strengths, I don't just mean the narrow word strengths in terms of doing strengths analysis, but all the things that your team has to bring, their time, their capabilities, their talents, their qualifications, their experiences, all of those things. You need to think through, what can we influence in terms of impact? What scope have you got for action, i.e. where in all the things that you can do? And then what have you got to bring with your team? So taking these things, we need to think about questions that you can ask your team. So going around the circle now, divide it up as a pie. We want to think about which of these things has the potential to make the greatest impact. Where have you got concerns and what tools have you got available to you? Now, I'm not in this session going to run through all the possible tools, but let's just to get an idea. So if you wanted more to talk about efficiency, you could do big things like try to implement lean thinking or Six Sigma, or you could implement systems thinking. There are a number of tools out there that you could think we could use this to see if we can improve the efficiency, the speed at which we get things done. Moving into quality, obviously there's the very famous quality circles, but what other ways do you have to influence quality? And how can your teams influence quality of what they're doing? Similarly with costs, where do you have control over costs? And helping you and your team understand that costs are not just money costs, but there's a real cost in how you use your time. There's a real cost in how you use the time of your colleagues. So inviting everybody to come on a 2-day development program, if it's run by you, might seem to have a low cost, but actually it's taking 2 days of everybody else's time, which has a real impact on the business, even if there isn't a cash amount of money being spent somewhere that equates to that cost. What opportunities you have to increase the volume of what you do, whether you are in the business of, you know, trying to put homeless people into houses or trying to sell more licenses for technology. What scope do you have there? And finally, on innovation. Now, a lot of people get worried about innovation and say, oh, we can't do innovation. That's a too big thing. But all you're asking people to do is to think, what can be different? So I've put all this up clearly to get people to think first about impact, because often when we think about maximizing team performance, we go first to thinking about all the people. But before you go there, I urge you to think as yourself as a manager and as a team about these things. And once you've got some ideas about these things, then you can move to thinking about the team. Now, we're often called in when team working relationships are not going well. Right. So I tend to have a slightly jaundiced view. I don't often get to work with a really high-performing team, because if they were really high-performing, they wouldn't be working with me initially. I hope that many of the teams we're working with are much higher performing when we finish. But if everything's going really, really well, people like me tend not to be invited in. So some of you may already be working in high-performing teams. Fantastic. But if not, I'm going to suggest a slightly different approach to the way things normally happen. So most team dynamics start off with trying to address behavior. So they look at, is the team working well together, and then analyze where those problems might be. What's the problem with the relationships? What's the problem with, people being able to do their best work? What is the problem in the whole people and behavior piece? But my thoughts are that you can't make everyone like each other. What you can do is understand the impact of their behavior on the performance of the team. And so I strongly recommend that in maximizing team performance, if you think that you are dealing with a dysfunctional team that's not working very well together, or you've got one member of the team who isn't performing very well, and it's a relationship thing, before you get stuck into the relationship, focus on the impact. What is the impact of that behavior? And then think about, how do we address that impact? So is that impact, to go back here, affecting any one of these things? Because if it's not affecting any one of these things, it may be something that, even though you don't like it very much, actually isn't really a problem, and you're allowing yourself to get hung up on it, but it's not really a problem if all of these things if none of these things are affected by this. So I'm just keeping a check on my time here. The way that we encourage you to think is to first of all go, all right, do I think some poor working relationships, in whatever context it means, is impacting the performance of the team? Understand the impact first, and then think about, how can I address the working relationship in order to impact the performance, so that you take your eyes away from trying to fix the people and into fixing the performance. Now, why does that help? That really helps because it releases you from the challenge to make everybody work together in a way that you feel culturally comfortable with, and instead allows you as manager to step back from the intensity of the emotions of the situation and be slightly more, I don't want to say the word, it's not distant, but slightly more collected. So how does that work? So I think you need to think about strengths. Now, there are lots of psychometric tools around. For example, one of them, there are various strengths tools around. There are 360 tools around. What I want you to think about before you choose the tool is to think about the problem that you want to solve, or the opportunities that are open to you when making that choice. So if you are, for example, want to explore strengths, you have to think to yourself, what is it about strengths that I want to know in order to address the performance problems of my team? Now, I know some of you are working in organizations where there's a cultural wide program to examine strengths and develop strengths across the organization as a whole. That's a good thing to do. It helps people develop. It's a fine program for an organizational development team to want to put in. When you are focused on maximizing team performance, it might not be that looking at strengths is the most important thing to do. It might be that you need to look at 360 feedback, so that you understand not just interrelationships between the people in the team, but, for example, how customers are perceiving with you, how business partners are perceiving you, how other stakeholders are working with you in order to improve the team performance. So it's very easy when you're buying team tools to get hooked on the personal development side of those tools. I'm urging you to think through the performance problem that you're addressing, so that you present your use of such tools in the context of performance rather than behavior. Now, this is not to say that it's not great to tackle behavior, but this is about you maximising team performance. And therefore, when you're wanting, for example, to introduce a tool like 360, it's about saying we are using this tool in order to help us think about the challenges we have in this area of performance, rather than go, oh, look, what's this 360 told us? Oh, that's interesting. Now what shall we do? Yeah, because the questions that you ask in the 360 will determine the answers you get out. And if you haven't thought about what you need to tackle, you might end up going down the wrong route. So how do we make sure that you end up in the right place? I would encourage you to start with a really simple team conversation, right? As you know, my book is called all about, it's subtitled 15 must-have conversations. Here's a really simple team conversation to have using some of the slides that we've already shared. So in your team, start a conversation around what does performance mean in the context of this team. So let's go back to efficiency, innovation, growth, all those things, faster, better, cheaper, more, new. What does it really mean, performance? And help them think through, not a series of measures for if we were a high-performing team, we would, but to think through what does performance mean in the context of this team, in this organization, in wherever we sit in our overall society. What does that look like? So if you are working in an NGO, high performance, a really strong team performance might look very different to if you're sitting in a financial services provider. But if you're sitting in an accounting department, you might think, well, it doesn't matter what accounting department I'm sitting in, performance is going to look the same. But actually, it might look very different if you're sitting in the accounting department in your NGO or the accounting department in your financial services organization. So make sure that people understand the context of the team and use examples to open up the discussion. And then think at a very headline level of what opportunities there are to improve the performance. Now, this might be as simple as a brainstorm, or you might use some more interesting techniques around workshop development. And again, you're all great workshop developers, I'm sure, to open up ideas. But this is all about opening up ideas, not closing them down, about where can we find opportunities to improve. And again, use each of the 5 dimensions to open up where there might be opportunities. And some of those will be quick wins and some of those will be bigger issues along the way. Then you need to rank the most promising of these opportunities. Now, if you start on the Six Sigma thing, even ranking opportunities is a huge piece of work, all right? You don't need to do that. You can rank very simply. You can look at which of these do we actually think we can get done in the next week, 3 weeks, 3 months, right? Just from a literal headline view of what's possible here. Or which of these things actually could 2 of us take away and solve quite simply if we really put our minds to it? Or which of these things would make an enormous difference and would be worth starting, even if we have to just do it a step at a time. So take some time and rank carefully what you're intending to do. And then out of that, you will end up with a few things, and you might come up with some questions, what you need to know to complete the ranking. But we've had a really simple conversation. Simple questions will create rich ideas in your teams. And then think through, so what do you need to do to take forward even one idea? Right? Really important that people see the conversation leads to action. Otherwise, it's just a talking shop. Now, if you start to run a conversation like that, this may be the first time that as a team, you've really talked about performance, because I'm not talking here about have we hit our target for this month, about are we on our service level agreement, about how far behind are we on that project, right? We're not talking here about individual tasks, goals, duties. We're talking about performance in the light of the 5 dimensions of performance and how we can impact them. So this is the very beginnings of developing a performance culture. And I've just put 3 very simple things here that connect together. So first of all, put discussions about performance on the agenda regularly. And when we're talking about performance, I'm not talking about Your project updates is everybody doing what they're meant to be doing at the rate they're meant to be doing it. We're talking about thinking about the dimensions of performance and how we might improve those in the context of our team. Then you can educate your team about some of the drivers of the performance that are relevant to them in this organization. So, for example, what does drive sales if you're in a sales-led organization? Even if you're not in the sales department, it would be good to know what drives sales, right? If you are in an academic institution, what are the drivers of student satisfaction? What are the drivers of of top quality research? Even if your job is actually to be running the cafes. If you're working in a hospitality business where you are in the accounts department, but actually what does drive success in a cafe? What does drive success in the restaurant? Help people understand what drives performance in the organization overall. And then you can use those two conversations to feed into your regular one-to-ones when you talk about individual performance. And of course, as always, the book has lots and lots of conversations in it, which cover everything from setting goals to dealing with poor performance. I know that some of you have read the book. It's available from Amazon, Waterstones, and all good bookshops, published by Pearson.